In the middle of a crowded mall, a 6-year-old boy slammed his palms against his ears, screamed without making a sound, his eyes wild with a panic no one around him could name. His mother, a powerful CEO, who controlled 400 people without blinking, stood completely still, helpless under the stares, and the whispers pressing in. No one stepped forward. No one knew how. Then a single father walked through the crowd toward the boy. He said nothing. He simply raised his hand and signed one word. And everything stopped. What do you do when one small gesture is all that stands between a breaking soul and solid ground? Amelia had not planned to be at the mall that afternoon. She had not planned most of the previous 6 years, if she was honest with herself, not the way her carefully color-coded calendar suggested. Henry had arrived into a life that was already moving at speeds that didn't leave room for pausing, and she had loved him fiercely and completely and entirely on her own terms, which turned out to be the wrong terms. She had learned that slowly, the way you learn most hard things, one small failure at a time, each one easy enough to dismiss, until they accumulated into something she could no longer look away from. She was the CEO of Meridian Technology Solutions. She had been profiled in 2 national magazines and 1 documentary that she had never watched all the way through because she couldn't stand to see her own face for that long. She had a talent for structure, for hierarchy, for finding the load-bearing point in any system and applying exactly the right pressure. She had applied this talent to her son, and it had not worked. And she did not yet understand why. Henry had been diagnosed with bilateral sensorineural hearing loss at 8 months old. Profound, permanent. The audiologist had used both of those words in the same sentence, and Amelia had absorbed them the way she absorbed all difficult information, with a very straight back and a pen in her hand, writing things down because writing things down gave her something to do with her hands when the rest of her wanted to come apart. She had enrolled him in the best early intervention program in the state. She had hired consultants. She had researched cochlear implants with the same obsessive thoroughness she brought to quarterly earnings analysis. She had done everything right. By every metric she knew how to measure. What she had not done, what she was only beginning to understand she had not done, was learn to speak his language. Not the technical version, not the clinical version, not the approved curriculum she paid someone else to administer 3 times a week. His language, the one his body already knew, the one she was afraid of, because being afraid of things was something she had spent 32 years refusing to admit. Matthew Carter did not have a plan for that Tuesday afternoon either. He had a list. He had Ella. Ella was 6, same age as Henry, though you would not have guessed they were the same age from looking at them. She was small for her size, serious-faced in the way of children who have spent time around adults who were working through something hard, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn set to her jaw. She was holding a stuffed rabbit named George that had originally been white and was now the particular gray of something deeply, repeatedly loved. She held Matthew's hand with the other hand, not because she was anxious but because she liked the contact. She had always been that way, even as a toddler, always reaching for him. Not out of need exactly, but out of preference. Matthew was 27 and worked maintenance for the Hargrove building downtown, the kind of job people described as unglamorous, which he had stopped minding years ago. He was tall and quiet, in the way of people whose quietness was earned rather than given. And he had a particular quality of stillness about him that Ella had once described to her kindergarten teacher as, "Daddy waits for things." Her teacher had mentioned this to him at a conference, and he had thought about it for weeks. She was right. He had learned to wait. He had learned it the hard way. His wife, Claire, had taught American Sign Language at Riverside Community College for 6 years before she died. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in September, gone by February. The kind of timeline that turned the world into a different place without giving you any time to adjust. She was 24 when the diagnosis came and 25 when it ended, and she had been teaching Matthew signs since their first date because she taught ASL the way some people breathe constantly, reflexively, as though language was too good to keep to only one group of people. By the time she died, he was conversational. By the time Ella was 3, he was fluent. He had kept going after Claire was gone. Partly for Ella, partly because stopping felt like a betrayal, and partly because he had discovered that it kept her close to him in a way nothing else quite did. He was not thinking about any of this when he heard the shift in the crowd near the north entrance. He was thinking about whether the hardware store would still have the specific size of hex bolt he needed, and whether Ella would want the teriyaki place or the sandwich shop for an early dinner. Then Ella's grip on his hand tightened, and he followed her gaze. He saw Henry first. The rocking, the pressed palms against ears, the silent open mouth. He had seen it before, not in person, but Claire had described it, explained it, the sensory overload that could overwhelm a deaf child in a loud public space, not because the noise was too loud for them, but because the vibration, the light changes, the sheer volume of physical stimulation had no coherent frame to contain it. He had asked her once what it felt like, and she had said, "Imagine being fluent in a language, and suddenly every sentence coming at you simultaneously, all at the same volume, with no pause between words. Imagine not being able to turn down the signal." He stood still for a moment, watching. He saw the mother rigid, pale, her hand extended toward the boy, and then pulling back, extended again, helpless in the particular way of someone who has more resources than she has ever needed, and has just encountered the one thing resources cannot fix. He saw the security guard approaching with his official problem face. He saw the phone going up in someone's hand. "Daddy?" Ella said quietly. She wasn't asking him to do anything. She was just telling him what she saw. "He's scared." "I know," Matthew said. He let go of her hand. "Stay right here." He walked toward them. Not quickly. Not with urgency. He had learned, watching Claire work with students, that urgency was its own kind of noise, that a body rushing toward a frightened person sent a signal before any words could, and the signal said, "Something is wrong. Something is very wrong. You are right to be afraid." He moved the way water moves when it isn't in a hurry. He crossed the distance between himself and Henry without looking at Amelia at all, without slowing, without making eye contact with anyone in the crowd. He simply arrived, and then he knelt. He knelt until he was below Henry's eye level. Not at it, below it. Looking up, Henry was still rocking, still pressing his palms to his ears, but his eyes, which had been fixed on nothing, moved. They found Matthew, not because Matthew had done anything, but because Matthew had stopped doing anything, and in a space full of motion, stillness was the loudest thing there was. Matthew waited until Henry's eyes focused. It took 4 seconds. It felt much longer. Then he raised his right hand, slowly, clearly, keeping it in Henry's direct line of sight. He brought his index and middle fingers together, touched them to his chin, and drew them forward and down, the motion deliberate, unhurried, large enough to read from a distance. He held the completed sign, "Safe." He held it. He didn't move. He didn't add anything, no smile, no nod, no supplementary gesture. Just the word, just the single claim, offered to a child who had never met him, in the only language that could reach him in that moment. Henry's rocking slowed. It didn't stop immediately. The body doesn't work that way. It takes time to climb down from the edge of overwhelm, the same way it takes time to stop shaking after a near miss. But the rhythm changed. The frantic back and forth compression eased into something smaller, something less desperate, and Henry's hands came down from his ears by degrees, like someone testing whether the air was safe to breathe. His eyes didn't leave Matthew's hand. Matthew signed it again. Same pace, same size. Safe. Then once more, and this time he kept both palms open, both of them saying the same thing in unison. A kind of doubling down, a kind of "I mean it." The crowd had gone still without anyone deciding to go still. These things happen sometimes, a pocket of genuine silence opening inside all the noise, a moment when something real enough and quiet enough cuts through the ambient din of modern life and makes people, briefly, pay attention to something other than themselves. Henry's hands moved. He copied the sign. Imprecise, his fingers didn't quite have the angle right, and his motion was jerky where Matthew's had been smooth. But it was the sign. Unmistakably the sign, reproduced by a 6-year-old boy on the floor of a mall who had never met the man in front of him, reaching for the one word being offered: safe. Amelia made a sound she immediately suppressed. She pressed her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were dry, but just barely. And something behind them had changed in the way things change when something breaks that you didn't know was under pressure. The security guard had stopped. He stood 3 feet away with his hands loose at his sides. And he didn't know what he was watching, but he understood that, whatever it was not a situation that needed him. Matthew held the sign for another few seconds after Henry copied it. Then he lowered his hand, very slowly, and waited. Henry watched the hand go down. His breathing was audible now, the deep, effortful breathing of someone coming back to themselves, the inhale-hold-exhale of a body reconsidering its emergency. He looked at Matthew. Matthew looked at him. After a moment, Henry unfolded from the floor, not dramatically, just the practical business of a small boy standing up, using his palms to push himself upright, brushing something invisible from his knee, with the absorbed attention of a child who has already half forgotten the state he was in 30 seconds ago. Matthew stood up too. He did not say anything to Amelia. He turned, without ceremony, and walked back toward where Ella was waiting with George tucked under her arm, watching everything with the still, careful attention of a child who had grown up around adult grief and knew when to be quiet. Amelia came after him. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was steady. She had trained it to be steady. What did you just do?" Matthew turned. He looked at her for a moment with the considering expression of someone deciding whether a conversation was necessary. Then, she blinked. That's just that? That's what he needed to hear. He didn't know it, in all the noise. He glanced back at Henry, who had found Ella, and was now examining George with the focused interest of a child encountering something genuinely worthy of study. Sometimes that's enough. Amelia followed his gaze. Her son was standing beside a small girl she didn't know, and the small girl was holding out the rabbit with both hands, offering it. Henry took it with both hands too, which was the only polite way to receive something offered that way, and he held it up and looked at its worn face with great seriousness, and some of the tension in Amelia's chest loosened without her permission. She looked back at Matthew. "Do you work with deaf children? Are you a therapist, or?" "No." He shook his head. "I just know some sign language." "Some," she repeated. He almost smiled. "Some." She wanted to ask more. She wanted to ask everything, the way she always wanted to ask everything, to pull back the curtain and find the methodology, the system, the replicable approach. But Henry was holding the rabbit, and Ella was showing him something in one of the display windows, and Matthew was already half turning away, and she understood that the conversation was ending, even though she hadn't agreed to let it end. "Thank you," she said. It came out smaller than she intended. He nodded once, the kind of nod that acknowledged without elaborating. Then he went to collect Ella and her rabbit, and just before he did, Ella gave Henry one of those small, serious waves that children give when they have decided someone is worth the effort. And Henry, still holding the rabbit, raised his free hand and waved back. Amelia stood there for a long moment after they were gone. Henry came to stand beside her and leaned against her leg, which he almost never did in public. She put her hand on his shoulder without thinking. He didn't pull away. She found out his name 2 days later. She hadn't planned to, or that was what she told herself. She had been in the mall on business, a meeting with the leasing director of the retail arm that shared a building with her corporate office. Nothing personal about it. She had not been looking for the maintenance worker in the gray shirt who had been half visible at the end of a corridor near the north entrance, crouched beside an air handling unit with a flashlight in one hand and a wrench in the other. She had simply seen him, and her feet had changed direction before her brain had quite caught up. His name was Matthew Carter. He had worked building maintenance for the Hargrove Group for 3 years. He lived in the Millfield neighborhood with his 6-year-old daughter. He was, by all available evidence, exactly as unremarkable as he appeared, a quiet man in a gray uniform doing a job that kept other people comfortable without their noticing. She noticed. She thought about calling HR and asking them to connect her with his department, then decided against it. She thought about leaving a note, then felt absurd about it. She did neither of these things for 4 days, and on the 5th day she walked to the north maintenance corridor at a time she knew would not be accidental, and found him there with his flashlight and his calm, and said, "I looked you up." He turned from the panel he was inspecting. He didn't look alarmed. "Okay," he said. "I know that's probably strange. A little." She had prepared 3 separate approaches to this conversation during the drive over. None of them had accounted for someone who simply said things back to her without embellishment. She pressed forward. "I wanted to ask, Henry has been asking about you." About the man who said safe. He said it to his speech therapist. She paused. He never just volunteers language like that. Matthew set down the flashlight. He was looking at her with the same quality of attention he had turned on Henry in the mall, not searching, not analyzing, just present. It was slightly unnerving. "I'm glad he's talking," he said. "I'd like to understand what you did, how you knew to do that." She was aware of how this sounded clinical, transactional, and she couldn't quite help it. "I've been working with specialists for 3 years. Therapists, consultants. Nobody has. He's never responded like that, in the middle of a meltdown. Nobody has been able to reach him that quickly." Matthew was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, he didn't answer the question she'd asked. He answered the one underneath it. "My wife was a sign language teacher. She died when our daughter was 2. He said it without particular weight, not like something he was over, but like something he had learned to carry, so that it no longer required 2 hands. I learned ASL because she taught me. I kept learning after she was gone. Henry, I could see what was happening. I knew what he needed." Amelia was quiet. She had been expecting a credential. She had gotten something else entirely. "I'm sorry," she said. "About your wife." "Thank you." She looked at her hands. She had a proposal, rehearsed hourly rate, flexible schedule, clear scope of work, and looking at him now, she understood that she had misread the situation badly enough to be embarrassing. She said it anyway, because she had never been good at abandoning a plan midway. "I'd like to hire you as a support specialist for Henry. I can pay well above market rate for anyone in the—" "No." She stopped. "I'm not a therapist," he said. "I'm not a teacher. I'm a maintenance tech who knows some ASL." He picked up the flashlight. "What Henry needs isn't a specialist. What he needs is someone to actually learn his language." And that he looked at her directly, not unkindly. "That's something you have to do yourself." The thing about being told no was that Amelia was not accustomed to it. She had people around her who disagreed, who pushed back, who offered alternatives with the carefully diplomatic hedging of employees who had something to lose. She did not have people who looked at her and simply refused, without cruelty and without apology, as though her offer were not a compliment she was conferring, but a responsibility she was trying to outsource. She drove back to her office and sat in the parking garage for 11 minutes before going upstairs. Henry talked about the man who said safe for a week and a half. He brought it up at breakfast, signing it in the approximate way he had learned in the mall, correcting himself against some internal memory of the motion. He signed it to his therapist. He signed it to Amelia once, looking at her with the particular directness of a child who is asking a question without having the words for the question yet. And she had signed it back to him badly, the shape all wrong, the motion choppy, and he had watched her hand, and then patiently, without frustration, shown her again. She looked it up on her phone that night. She found 3 different videos. She watched all of them. She practiced in the bathroom mirror until her hand hurt. The company's annual partnership summit was in the 3rd week of October, held at the Meridian headquarters on the 14th floor, which had floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that made new clients go quiet in a satisfying way. Amelia had planned to leave Henry with his au pair for the evening, but the au pair had a family emergency, and the backup arrangement fell through, and by 2 in the afternoon, she had exhausted her alternatives and made the decision she should not have made. She would bring him. He had been through events before. He would be fine. He was not fine. By 7:30, the lights were at full commercial brightness. There were 64 adults in a space designed to impress rather than comfort. The ambient noise level had climbed steadily for 2 hours, and Henry was in the corner near the secondary bar holding both ears and rocking, and the rocking was the kind that meant the threshold was close. Amelia crossed the room in 15 seconds. She crouched in front of him the way she had watched Matthew crouch, lower than eye level, looking up, and Henry's eyes found her, frantic, asking a question she didn't have the answer to. She thought of Matthew, she thought of the mall, and the stillness, and the single word offered into the noise like something solid to hold on to. She raised her right hand. She brought her fingers together, touched them to her chin. She had practiced this, badly, in a bathroom mirror at 11 o'clock at night in her home, and drew them forward and down. She held it. Her hand was not steady. The angle was probably wrong. Henry's rocking slowed. She did it again. He watched her hand. She watched his breathing. The second time, she kept her eyes on his face and not on her own hand. And something about that made it different, made it less like a technique being deployed and more like a thing being said. Henry's arms came down. He leaned forward and put his forehead against her shoulder. And she put her arms around him, and he didn't push her away. Around them, 64 professionals in evening wear went quietly about the business of networking, and none of them knew what had just happened in the corner by the secondary bar, and it didn't matter that they didn't know. Amelia was crying. She didn't notice for a moment, and then she did, and she didn't stop. She texted Matthew that night. After Henry was asleep, she had gotten his number from HR, under a pretext she now found embarrassing. She typed and deleted 4 different messages, and sent the 5th one. Henry signed safe to me tonight. I signed it back. He stopped. I don't know what I'm doing, but I need to learn. Not to hire someone, to learn myself. If you're willing to help me understand, not as an employee, I'd appreciate it. He didn't respond that night. She hadn't expected him to. And she lay in the dark for a while, looking at her phone, and then put it face down, and went to sleep. In the morning there was one line, I can show you some things, for Henry's sake. No hourly rate. She almost typed back to argue about the rate. She stopped herself. She typed, thank you. Then she put the phone down and went to make breakfast. They met at a park, neutral ground, on a Saturday morning when the light was low and thin, and the benches were cold enough to keep the space mostly empty. Matthew brought Ella, and Ella brought George. And Henry met George again as though greeting an old friend, with the solemn handshake energy of a child who takes these things seriously. Matthew brought a notebook, actual paper, which Amelia noted with the faint surprise of someone who associated paper with a previous era, and opened it to a page of hand-drawn sign diagrams, with annotations in a small, precise handwriting. These are the ones most useful for meltdown intervention, he said. Not commands, not instructions, statements. Things that tell him where he is, not what to do. Amelia looked at the page. Safe. Calm. Here. With you. I see you. I see you, she said. She looked up. That one especially. Matthew nodded. Kids like Henry, they spend a lot of time in a room full of people who are looking at them without seeing them. The sign doesn't just mean I see you visually. In context, it means I know you're here and I'm not going anywhere. She wrote it down. He showed her the shape. She tried it 3 times, the last time correctly, and when she got it right he said there in a simple, factual way that was somehow more sustaining than praise. Henry and Ella were on the climbing structure, conducting what appeared to be a negotiation with stakes, only they fully understood. Henry was signing something Amelia couldn't parse, and Ella was responding in the approximate, good faith ASL of someone who had grown up adjacent to the language without being raised in it, and they were getting along fine. More than fine, they were getting along with the easy fluency of children who have found a frequency that works. How did Ella learn? Amelia asked. From Claire, first. Then from me. He paused. She picks it up faster than I do. She always has. Something about the way kids are wired. Henry's therapist says the same thing, that his capacity to acquire language is still very high, at his age. That every month matters. Then every month, learn something new. He said it plainly, without the gentle evasion she was accustomed to from professionals trying to manage expectations. It doesn't have to be fast. It just has to be consistent. She looked at the notebook page. Are you always this direct with people? He thought about it. I'm usually quieter than this. She almost smiled. It arrived and departed quickly, like something she wasn't quite ready to sustain. The Saturdays continued. They were not therapy sessions and not social calls. They occupied a category that neither of them named, which was probably wise. Matthew taught, patiently, and without ceremony. Amelia learned, with the focused intensity she brought to anything she had decided to take seriously. Henry progressed with the unstoppable speed of a child who had been waiting for someone to meet him where he lived. His signing became more precise, his emotional regulation measurably more stable, his meltdowns less frequent and shorter in duration when they came. One Saturday in November, Ella taught Henry 17 signs in 40 minutes, inventing a game that involved naming every object on the playground. Amelia watched from the bench, and Matthew sat beside her, and neither of them spoke for a while, which was its own kind of communication. She would have loved him, Matthew said. He meant Claire. He said it without looking away from the children. Amelia understood what he was offering in saying it, not a bid for sympathy, but a context, a piece of the story that explained how he had become who he was. She received it carefully. She sounds like someone who loved easily, she said. Broadly, he corrected gently. She didn't love easily. She loved broadly. There's a difference. Amelia thought about that. She thought about the difference between loving broadly and loving narrowly, and about all the years she had loved Henry with everything she had, compressed into the dimensions she understood, and how a narrower love, however fierce, had not been wide enough to hold him. I've been doing it wrong, she said. It wasn't quite an apology. It was an inventory. You've been doing what you knew, Matthew said. And now you know something else. December came in cold and clear, with the particular quality of winter light that makes everything look like the last version of itself. Henry had a good month. His therapist noted the improvements in her report, with the careful understatement of a professional who had learned not to overpromise. But Amelia had learned to read between the clinical language, and what she read was, "This is real, this is holding." On a Saturday 3 weeks before Christmas, they were at the park again, and the children were bundled into coats, and Ella had tucked George into the front of her jacket for warmth. Henry was on the swings. Matthew was pushing him. Just slightly. Henry liked a gentle arc, not the stomach-dropping height some children chase. Amelia was standing to the side, watching, when Henry twisted on the swing to find Matthew's face, and raised his hand. "Safe," he signed. Clearly, correctly, with the easy precision of a child who has made a word his own. He wasn't signing it because he was frightened. He was signing it because he wanted to say it, because the word had become his word for something he felt in that moment, the cold air and the arc of the swing, and the man pushing him and his friend somewhere nearby, and the world, for once, exactly the right size. Matthew signed it back. His face was very still. Ella, from somewhere behind them, laughed at something, some private amusement with a squirrel, or her own imagination, and the sound carried across the cold air with the specific brightness of a child entirely at ease. Amelia looked at Henry on the swing, and at Matthew's hand, and at the sign hanging between them like something made of light. She was not the CEO of anything. In that moment, she was not a profile in a magazine or a name on a building directory, or a woman who had done everything right by every metric she knew how to measure. She was a mother standing in the cold watching her son tell the world that he felt safe. And the world, some small corner of it, the only corner that mattered, answering back. There is a particular kind of change that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with a revelation or a turning point or a single definitive moment you can circle on a calendar. It arrives the way winter becomes spring, incrementally, so gradually that you cannot name the day it happened, only look back weeks later and realize that something fundamental has shifted without your noticing. Henry Brooks stopped having meltdowns in public. Not all at once, not perfectly. There were still hard days. Days when the world pressed in too fast and too hard, and he needed space to come back to himself. But those days grew fewer and shorter, and when they came, he had language for them now. He had the signs that Matthew had given him, and that Amelia had learned in bathroom mirrors and park benches and the corners of meetings she could not avoid on Saturdays. He had the particular confidence of a child who has been told, in a language he could receive, "You are here, you are seen, you are safe." Amelia changed more slowly. She was aware of the change, which was new for her. She had always preferred to be the one making changes happen, not the one being changed. But awareness did not mean resistance. And she found, with some surprise, that she did not want to resist. She listened more in her board meetings. She delegated with less oversight. She moved through her world with a fraction less of the urgent forward pressure that had gotten her to the 14th floor, and also, she now understood, had cost her something real with the person she loved most. Matthew and Ella became part of the fabric of their life in the quiet, unremarkable way of things that belong somewhere. Not with a formal arrangement or a declaration or a category anyone needed to name. Saturday mornings, an occasional dinner, late, after the children were asleep, with the specific quality of conversation that happens between people who have seen each other clearly, a trust built not from words but from accumulated evidence. On a cold morning in January, in a park that was nearly empty, Henry sat between Ella and Amelia on a bench, and George the rabbit was on his lap, and Matthew was buying hot chocolate from a cart near the path. Henry watched him go, and then turned to Amelia, and raised his hand, and signed something. She knew the sign. He was telling her, "I see you." She felt her eyes fill. She pressed her lips together. She signed it back. Matthew came back with the hot chocolate, and distributed it, and sat down at the end of the bench, and the four of them sat there in the cold light with their cups and their breath making small clouds in the air. A single word had not changed the world. It had not solved the hard things or erased the distances, or given Amelia back the years she had spent learning the wrong language for her son. A word is a small thing, finally. A gesture of the hand, a shape held in the air for 3 seconds, and then released. But a word given clearly, in the right moment, to a child who needed it, a word that said, "You are here, I am here," and neither of us is going anywhere. That word had found the place in him where the fear lived, and it had said something true, and the truth had been enough, not to fix everything, not to end the hard parts, but to begin the better ones. Henry leaned against Matthew's arm. Matthew let him. Ella signed safe at George, for reasons of her own, and the cold January light came down, and the park was quiet, and somewhere in the city, a world moved at its usual speed, and none of that mattered very much at all.